And today this is our fourth session of our Altair Aerospace Coffee Break series. And what I want to show today are how we do keyboard shortcuts and selections of various entities or whatever it is you want to select or edit or query in our new HyperMesh interface. So I'm not so much going to focus on every individual little keyboard shortcut or option there, as much as I'll focus on some tips and tricks that I've had and that that I've developed over learning the software myself over these past few years. So yeah, hopefully these tips ideally will make you guys a little more dangerous, a little faster with the new interface of HyperMesh. So yeah, I'm excited to show you guys some tips today. And at any point, if you have any questions, we have a chat, we have a QA field. You can drop your question in either field, and I'll be able to address those questions in the last few minutes of our session today. All right, with that out of the way, I'll go ahead and open up HyperMesh. I'm going to be showing this in HyperMesh version 25. But basically, everything I show here today is going to be consistent over the last few releases. So there shouldn't be any issues there. All right, I'm going to load up just a wing model that I have. If you'd like to follow along, feel free to load up any of your own models. I'm going to just drag and drop this HyperMesh model. Get that out of the way. And we'll say okay. So we'll wait for this wing to load in. And I want to first touch on selections and this sort of new entity selector that we have in the GUI of the new interface. Classic interface, if you were familiar with that. But we now have this entity selector up here, which just gives us options to switch to like any particular type of entity, for isolating, querying, editing, maybe moving, for various reasons you might want to select some entity, right? So you could say switch that selector to elements, and now I'm selecting elements directly, as opposed to say all, which generally it'll select like a component, as you see here. So yeah, you now have this new entity selector. And these are also mapped to keyboard shortcuts. So if you see under each of these entity groups, you'll see one of the letters is underlined, meaning that's the keyboard shortcut to switch to that entity type in your selector. And there's some cool stuff you can do with that I'll show in a second. But just to show you what I mean here, so like let's say I want to quickly grab some elements, I can just hit E and grab some, with a box selection. But we of course have also these, your sort of standard kind of options for like if you wanted to select all of the text in say like a Word document, right? You might do Control A. So we have operations similar to that in here, right? So with my entity selector set to elements, I can do Control A, and that selects all of my displayed elements, right? So tons of keyboard shortcuts you can do with that. I'll touch on a few more in a second. So yeah, in addition to that, I think kind of the more interesting ones, we also have isolate. So for example, if you wanted to maybe like look at some specific property, I can hit P until I get to my property view, and then maybe select that property and hit I to isolate. And there we go. Now I've just isolate being, showing this property I've selected, hiding every other property, right? Um, and you can also do, like Control Z, right? So undo, kind of similar to any standard, document that you might want to undo. You can Control Z to undo. And so that works with tools, views, Control Z's. Yeah, pretty good for just undoing anything quickly. So that's kind of similar to like the reject option from the old sort of panels, if that was an option you were used to. Um, so yeah, and then of course you have like H to hide, so they're all pretty intuitive. But if you ever forget, you can select something, and all of those options are shown here as well, or those keyboard shortcuts, I should say. So hide, isolate, show. You can always just right click and select them as well. Okay. All right, so what else do I want to show? So you can also do advanced selections with shortcuts in multiple different ways. So let me kind of elaborate on that. So like let's say, for example, you wanted to select all of the elements in a property or a material. You could do that two ways. So before you had like advanced selection options if you clicked on the box. So you still have that here, right? So I could hit E to go select elements, and then period on my keyboard. That'll bring up my advanced selection options. So I could select elements by component, by face, by config, so like by element type here, or like say by material. And I can either select the material in the list or in the GUI. I might need to zoom in on this guy here. There we go. And there, now that grabs all the elements that were in that material or that material is assigned to. So you got that option now. You always had advanced selection options, but you can now bring it up just quickly with hitting dot on your keyboard. But you can also do this a different way, kind of similar to what I referenced earlier, how you have each of these keyboard shortcuts mapped to each of these entity types. So you can actually use that to effectively do advanced selections. So like, what do I mean? So for example, if I hit M to go to my material view, and so, which I guess is another point I didn't really mention, right? But as you change your selector, it'll also change your view to sort of color by whatever entity you're selecting, assuming you have the automatic coloring option set. So yeah, I can do, like, if I wanted to, again, select all of the elements in this material, I can now select that material, all right? Parentheses one, meaning I've selected the single material, and then if I hit E, it changes the selector to elements, and then it automatically still holds onto all of those elements that were assigned to that material. So it just makes it a little bit faster, in my opinion, to do advanced selections that way, right? So instead of having to go to the advanced selection and then find what type of advanced selection you want to do, you can just, hit M, select your material, hit E, and there you go. So I think that's pretty neat. That works with a lot of different entities, right? So you can do that with like selecting elements in a property, elements in a component, in a part, things like that. And you can get pretty quick with that. Okay. So another thing I wanted to touch on was how you can use these keyboard shortcuts to get a little bit faster within guide bars. So like, let me show, like maybe say, let's say I'm not a huge fan of this mesh here, right? It's not the best mesh. So let's say I want to rebuild it really quick. What we can do is we can go to our 2D. I'm not sure. I don't think rebuild automatically has a keyboard shortcut set. Yeah, it doesn't look like we do. But that's fine. I'll touch on that in a second. But yeah, so now that I'm in my rebuild tool, I can select my elements. And again, here I could do like, hit dot and say select by material or by components. Or I can just do like some box selection, like so. All right. I'll go to advanced options. Mm, okay, I don't think I'll mess with that right now. Um, But now what we can do from here is, so, if you were using a classic interface, you might have used tab to switch between each of the fields in the panel, basically, like each of the fields defining the tool. But now you can do that with the middle click on your mouse. So now if I middle click, it'll go to the next field where, in this case, for rebuilding my mesh, I can define flow guides. So I can kind of define some guides in which I want the mesh to flow. And tools like this, using the middle mouse click, it's pretty nice because then it'll define that flow guide, and then I can middle click again. And without having to click anything on my keyboard, I can just continue defining more flow guides. Middle click, And so this works also like if you're maybe dragging a hex mesh and defining multiple guides, you can keep middle clicking to sort of quickly go between defining each guide. Um, so I'm not sure how well this will work with those element options, not perturbed, but I'll go ahead and try rebuilding. So now I can go ahead and just middle click again, and that will actually perform the operation of the tool. So if I middle click again, oh, let me go back and middle click again. There we go. So now go through and rebuild that mesh. Cool. Now we have a slightly better mesh it looks like, and I can, go and rebuild those, or I can just hit escape and escape again, and now we're out of our tool. So, I show that kind of slowly to, kind of hammer home kind of what I'm talking about here, but hopefully it's coming across that as you get used to cuts with the keyboard and with your mouse, you can start performing these operations really fast. If you know what you're doing and get comfortable. Okay, so that's and again, the I also wanted to show that, but the undo works with tools as well. So like if I wasn't satisfied with that mesh, I can Control Z to undo. Or you may say, geez, actually did like that mesh. I want to redo. You can hold Control, hit Y. There you go. So again, you got that Control Z to undo. That's kind of effectively like the reject option from the old panels, but I think a little bit more, a little bit more powerful. Okay. And so another thing, I've been showing all these keyboard shortcuts. We also have keyboard shortcuts to bring up certain tools. And we have defaults for commonly used tools, like say meshing, right? So for just creating a 2D mesh, I believe this is F12. Yep, F12. And we'll typically like highlight. I'll try to find one. I don't think I have one here, but it'll generally say like kind of in parentheses what the keyboard shortcut is for that tool. Yeah, like here you go. So Shift F4 for moving, F4 for measure. So F4, that bring up measure tool, and I can quickly make a measurement, and then escape to get out of it. And so you can also, if you want to view all of the default keyboard shortcuts and even create your own and edit your own keyboard shortcuts, you can go through View, Keyboard Shortcuts. And if you do hide empty up here, that'll just show you what all the default keyboard shortcuts are. So some keyboard shortcuts for displaying, right, editing, etc. Oh yeah, and you can also this is cool too. You can also assign views to keyboard shortcuts. So if you got like all your views defined, all of your tools mapped to keyboard shortcuts, you like probably wouldn't even need a mouse necessarily. But you can also define your own keyboard shortcuts. Let me collapse everything here. So this can be nice, if you have a handful of tools that you use often, you can assign those tools keyboard shortcuts, assuming that they're not already assigned to any. Um, and what I find, so let's take let's look at an example here. So like maybe let's say you're doing a lot of text meshing, right? So you might be creating a lot of shell meshes, and then you might be extruding those shell meshes often, into hex elements. So you could then, for example, say, all right, so I want a keyboard shortcut for creating my 2D mesh. So let's see, I believe that is, yeah, let's see. Yeah, so we already have that assigned to F12, so I think we're good then. Um, but actually, let's say you're not a fan of the batch mesher. Let's say you prefer to do freeform. So this is kind of like a general 2D auto mesh. So, maybe you could say, actually, I want this mesh to be mapped to F12. You can say F12, and then it'll say, hey, that's already assigned to batch mesher. Do you want to replace it? So you can override the existing or the default keyboard shortcuts here. So I can say, yes, now my F12 will do a general 2D auto mesh as opposed to a batch mesher mesh. Okay, so now I got that I can quickly create some shell mesh to drag my hex mesh. And, like let's say now I also want to map the extrude tool so that I can, extrude my 2D meshes. So I'll go, I believe that's under, I can remember where that was. So here's another cool thing. If you don't remember where something is, you can search it. So I'll just search, oops, if I spell it right, there we go. Here we go. Under topology, extrude. So just FYI for those who are maybe on some of the older versions of HyperMesh, extrude now is the tool for that you can use to create hex elements from shells. So this is the tool I will also map to a keyboard shortcut. And what I found is generally Shift plus some letter is typically not taken by any other default keyboard shortcuts. So that's typically what I would assign my tools to. So like in this case for extrude, I'll assign that to Shift E. So holding Shift, hit E, it'll define that keyboard shortcut. Oh, I did this. Oh, I thought this was I guess I hit the only one that has shift assigned to it. Maybe let me try like Control E and see if that one's open. That one's export. Okay, let me. I think I can also do Alt E. Oh, maybe not. Maybe Control Shift E. There we go. Okay, cool. That one wasn't taken. And of course, if the other tools that were mapped to that shortcut weren't that relevant to you, you can just again replace them. So Control Shift E will now bring up the extrude tool. Okay, so let's take a look at like an example of how fast you can get with these when you get comfortable with the keyboard shortcuts. So like let's say, I have a solid that I want to hex mesh, right? So let me go, I'm gonna hit S, that's hit S again to solids. I'm gonna hit A, that'll display all of my solids. And if I hit I, that'll isolate all of my solids. Alrighty. So just like that, I've isolated all of the solid geometry in my model. So let's say, we'll take a look at an easy part here. And I'm going to select this solid, I to isolate again. Okay. So we got this solid. And now if I remember, right, F12 was my auto mesh. If I want, I can go into options. That should be fine. Maybe I'll do like well, that should be fine. I can select that surface, middle click. There we go. I have my mesh. Not the most fine. Maybe if I want, I can control A. Okay, maybe not, but I can do like a box selection, do some edge editing. But let's say I'm good here. I'm going to escape, and now what was it? Control Shift E to extrude my mesh. So I'm going to say mesh, hit E. Okay, guess that's not working right now. I'll hit E to elements, and Control A will select my displayed elements. Middle click, I can now define my guides. So luckily I have an edge right here. Blammo, got an edge right there that I can use as my guide. So I'll middle click again, and then middle click again. And just like that, we get our mesh. We get our little hex mesh. So then I can also like escape, maybe go like maybe elements dot by config, select my 3D elements, and then I. Now I've isolated that 3D mesh I just created. And then, once you say that looks good, I can hit escape, all, and then A will display everything again. Oh, yeah, I forgot I have a bunch of pressures. I shouldn't have done that. I was about to crash my HyperMesh model. But yeah, that just about covers all I wanted to show. Yeah, again, I think you can get pretty fast. with these keyboard shortcuts, kind of using them as effectively as advanced selections, sort of, maybe select a material type, hit E, it'll automatically switch to all the elements. And yeah, again, maybe practice getting a little fast with the guide bars as well, using the middle click to kind of progress through each tab. I think it's something it's easy to forget, but I think once you get used to it, you can, get really, really quick with some of these tools. So yeah, hope that was interesting for you guys. If you have any questions, I got a few minutes. Be happy, more than happy to answer any questions or comments from you guys if you have any.